6 seconds. That's all it took. 6 seconds to transform what should have been a triumphant NFL season opener into one of the most shocking, talked-about moments in recent league history. In a stadium filled with tens of thousands of fans, millions watching on live broadcast, and cameras capturing every angle, defensive star Jalen Carter made a decision that would instantly ripple through the Philadelphia Eagles organization and beyond. It wasn't a tackle, a game-winning sack, or a highlight reel play. It was a moment of unthinkable impulsivity. Carter, standing across from Dallas Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott, did something no professional athlete ever should. He launched a projectile of saliva directly at his opponent. Immediate reactions were chaotic. Officials converged. Yellow flags rained down. The crowd, expecting the roar of competition, instead fell silent in stunned disbelief. Players on both sidelines reacted instinctively. Micah Parsons, normally a picture of composure, reportedly had to be restrained by teammates. CeeDee Lamb's shouting echoed throughout the stadium, a mix of anger and disbelief. Eagles defenders scrambled, trying to contain the fallout, while coaches were left grappling with how to respond in real time. 6 seconds. That's all it took to disrupt years of preparation, strategy, and team chemistry. For Philadelphia fans, the shock extended far beyond the field. This wasn't just an on-field misstep, it was a cultural earthquake. Social media exploded. Opinions collided. Some defended Carter, citing competitive intensity and the heat of the moment. Others demanded accountability, calling for immediate action, termination, and a clear message that such behavior would never be tolerated. The Eagles fan base, already sensitive to organizational controversies and long-standing stereotypes, found themselves grappling with another public spectacle, threatening to define the franchise's identity. Within hours, sources indicate the organization was already in crisis mode. Ownership, coaching staff, and veteran leaders convened emergency sessions, weighing competitive advantage against organizational integrity. Termination was debated. Suspension was debated. Every possible outcome was considered, dissected, and argued over in heated exchanges. Reports suggest Jeffrey Lurie, the team's owner, made his position crystal clear. Reputation and principle would not be compromised for talent, not even for a foundational defensive player like Carter. The decision-making process alone revealed the stakes at hand not just for one player, but for the Eagles' culture, the locker room dynamics, and the season's trajectory. And while the Eagles scrambled to regain control internally, the ripple effects extended externally. Cowboys players processed the incident privately, motivated and emboldened. Media outlets seized on every detail, amplifying the story far beyond the world of football. Sponsors, fans, and analysts weighed in. 6 seconds had detonated a firestorm of attention, opinion, and consequence. The question wasn't just about what Carter had done, but what would come next. How would the Eagles respond? Could the team recover its focus and identity without one of its premier defensive talents? And what did this moment mean for the young player's future in the NFL? This is a story about more than a single act of misconduct. It's about chaos, accountability, culture, and the consequences of split-second decisions in the high-stakes world of professional sports. 6 seconds forever changed careers, altered rivalries, and tested the very foundation of a franchise. And as you'll see, the fallout from that one instant would echo not just for the rest of the season, but for years to come. The incident itself was over before anyone could blink, but its impact was instantaneous and irreversible. 6 seconds into the season opener, as the Philadelphia Eagles prepared to face the Dallas Cowboys, Jalen Carter lined up defensively, poised to execute the first play of the game. Everything appeared routine, the crowd buzzing with anticipation, Prescott surveying the formation, the Eagles' defensive line bracing for action. But then, without warning, Carter acted. What happened next stunned everyone watching. He deliberately spat directly at Dak Prescott. Not a stray gesture, not an accident, an intentional act that immediately crossed the line of professional conduct. Referees reacted instantly. Yellow flags cascaded onto the field, signaling the severity of the infraction. Officials converged on Carter, quickly assessing the situation, and within seconds, ejection was announced. The crowd at Lincoln Financial Field went from excitement to disbelief. Some fans frozen in shock, others shouting in anger. Coaches rushed to intervene, trying to prevent escalation, while players from both teams bristled with emotion. Reports indicate that Micah Parsons had to be physically restrained, and CeeDee Lamb's frustration echoed audibly throughout the stadium. It was chaos condensed into moments, all before a single competitive snap had even been attempted. For the Eagles, the ejection represented more than a disciplinary issue. It was a sudden, catastrophic disruption of their defensive game plan. Carter, a second-year sensation and cornerstone of the defense, was gone before the season had even truly begun. Defensive coordinator Sean Desai was forced to scramble, adjusting rotations and communication patterns on the fly. Backup players were thrust into high-pressure roles, testing the depth of the roster and the readiness of the team's contingency plans. What had been meticulously rehearsed throughout training camp became instantly obsolete, replaced by improvisation and urgency. The timing made the incident even more consequential. Losing a premier defensive talent 6 seconds into a high-stakes rivalry game isn't just a setback, it's a crisis. The Cowboys, initially expecting a standard opener, found themselves suddenly emboldened, sensing the disruption in the Eagles' lineup. Meanwhile, Eagles players were caught in a surreal mix of disbelief and responsibility, having to defend a teammate whose actions defied justification. Victory, for a brief moment, seemed almost irrelevant, overshadowed entirely by the magnitude of the chaos unfolding. Even as the game continued, the ripple effects were immediate. Public perception shifted as fans and analysts dissected the act, weighing intensity against impropriety, loyalty against accountability. This single moment, a 6-second lapse in judgment, would dominate headlines, shape organizational decisions, and redefine the team's cultural narrative. Carter's action wasn't just a personal misstep, it was an event that would alter team dynamics, fan trust, and even the trajectory of the season. By the time the Eagles secured the victory, the narrative had already shifted. Nobody celebrated tactical brilliance. Nobody discussed strategic execution. The world was focused entirely on what had just transpired in those 6 unforgettable seconds. And as the stadium emptied and the initial shock began to settle, one truth became undeniable. The incident wasn't simply a story of misconduct, it was a defining moment, one that would echo far beyond the field, shaping careers, rivalries, and the franchise's identity in ways no one could have anticipated. The moment Carter was ejected, the stadium didn't just react, it erupted into controlled chaos. What began as disbelief quickly escalated into a tense, dangerous environment. Teammates and coaches scrambled to contain emotions, but the intensity of the rivalry and the magnitude of the act made restraint almost impossible. Reports from those on the field describe a surreal scene. Micah Parsons, normally composed and disciplined, had to be physically restrained by multiple teammates. CeeDee Lamb's voice cut through the stadium, cursing in frustration as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. The Cowboys' offensive line abandoned positions, defensive players pivoted instinctively, and both sidelines seemed on the verge of a confrontation that could have ended in violence. 6 seconds had turned a controlled, professional environment into a near brawl. Inside the Eagles' sideline, the atmosphere was equally explosive. Coaches rushed to maintain order, attempting to restrain players from confronting Carter or escalating the incident further. Yet, even with intervention, the players' emotions were raw. Anger, disbelief, and disappointment collided with the instinct to protect a teammate, creating a psychological storm. The combination of shock and frustration was palpable. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a public, humiliating misstep that jeopardized everything the team had prepared for. The competitive ramifications were immediate. Losing Carter, the team's premier defensive talent, before the first snap forced defensive coordinator Sean Desai into emergency improvisation. Rotations were shuffled, backup players thrust into high-pressure roles, and communication patterns that had been drilled for weeks fell apart instantly. Training camp strategies, film study, and preseason preparation became almost irrelevant. The Eagles had to adapt on the fly, all while processing the emotional fallout of a teammate's reckless decision. Meanwhile, the Cowboys capitalized on the chaos without touching the ball. Prescott remained composed publicly, but insiders suggest he was privately processing a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. The psychological advantage had subtly shifted. What should have been a standard opening series now carried layers of personal animosity and competitive tension. The rivalry, already fierce historically, now included an entirely new dimension, one rooted in emotion, humiliation, and sudden upheaval. Fans and spectators weren't spared from the turmoil either. Social media erupted as clips of the incident went viral. Within minutes, millions were analyzing, debating, and reacting to what they had seen. Comment threads filled with anger, support, and speculation. Every angle was dissected. Was it competitive heat, personal animosity, or a lapse in judgment? For the Eagles fan base, accustomed to managing high emotions and intense scrutiny, the incident reinforced anxieties about player behavior and organizational culture. By the time the dust settled, it was clear that the 6 seconds had far-reaching consequences. The chaos extended beyond a single play, a single game, or even a single season. It had created a ripple effect across locker rooms, coaching staff, fans, and rivalries. Eagles players would now face weeks of pressure, their performances scrutinized through the lens of Carter's absence. Opponents would exploit the vulnerability exposed in those fleeting moments. And for the team's leadership, it was a stark reminder that a single act could destabilize not just a game plan, but an entire culture. In short, those 6 seconds didn't just end a play, they upended everything. And as the Eagles tried to regain composure, one reality became undeniable. The incident had unleashed chaos that would define the rest of the season. The moment Carter's ejection made headlines, the story exploded beyond Lincoln Financial Field. Social media became an unrelenting firestorm. Clips of the incident spread like wildfire, accumulating millions of views within hours. Hashtags trended across platforms, fan debates erupted in comment sections, and analysts dissected the act from every angle. Some defended Carter, claiming it was a heat-of-the-moment reaction, evidence of fierce competitive intensity. Others were unforgiving, calling for immediate accountability, demanding termination, and questioning the integrity of a franchise that could even consider retaining a player after such a public transgression. The Eagles' fan base fractured almost instantly. Some fans rallied behind Carter, emphasizing his talent, his youth, and the emotional intensity of a high-stakes rivalry. They argued that one impulsive act shouldn't define a career, especially for a player whose potential had already reshaped the team's defensive identity. Yet even among defenders, there was unease, a recognition that the act had crossed a line no professional athlete should breach. On the opposite side, critics saw the incident as the latest in a series of organizational and player controversies, a confirmation of long-standing stereotypes that Eagles fans had spent years trying to overcome. The intensity of online discourse mirrored the intensity on the field, passionate, emotional, and often divisive. Media coverage amplified the story even further. Sports networks devoted hours to debate the ethics, consequences, and long-term implications of Carter's behavior. Analysts questioned whether a single act could justify termination, while cultural commentators expanded the conversation beyond football, linking it to broader workplace conduct and accountability standards. Mainstream outlets picked up the story, framing it as a cultural moment as much as a sports controversy. What had been a 6-second incident now dominated headlines, trending far beyond typical game analysis. Within the Eagles organization, the public response created additional pressure. Social media commentary, fan outrage, and national scrutiny demanded an immediate, decisive response. Sponsors and partners began asking questions, ticket holders sought reassurances, and analysts speculated on the long-term ramifications for both team culture and competitive performance. Every statement, every decision, every action would now be viewed through the lens of this incident. The ejection wasn't just a moment of embarrassment, it had become a public test of accountability, principle, and organizational integrity. The fan reaction also highlighted a generational divide. Younger audiences, accustomed to viral incidents and online outrage, tended to view the termination as harsh, almost unforgiving. Older fans, veterans of Eagles' controversies and long-term franchise history, saw it as a necessary enforcement of standards, a statement that character mattered more than talent. Social media metrics confirmed the scale: millions of impressions, tens of thousands of shares, and comment threads numbering in the hundreds of thousands within just a few hours. Ultimately, the public perception of the incident magnified its consequences. What happened in 6 seconds on the field became a debate about values, discipline, and the balance between competitive drive and professional conduct. The Eagles were no longer just managing a player, they were navigating a storm of perception, expectation, and scrutiny, all unfolding in real time. Fans weren't just spectators anymore, they were participants in the story, their outrage, support, and judgment, shaping the narrative as much as the actions on the field. While fans debated and social media erupted, the Philadelphia Eagles leadership was already in full crisis mode. Inside the NovaCare complex, tension crackled like electricity. Jeffrey Lurie, the team's owner, reportedly slammed his hand on the conference table, making one thing unmistakably clear: reputation and principle would not be compromised for talent, no matter how foundational the player. Across the room, Howie Roseman, the general manager known for his creative roster maneuvers and championship-building acumen, counseled patience, suggesting suspension rather than outright termination. The divide was stark: competitive advantage versus organizational integrity, pragmatism versus principle. Emergency meetings stretched into the night. Sources indicate heated debates unfolded over every conceivable angle: the implications for the team's defensive scheme, the potential trade value of Carter, financial ramifications, and the precedent such a decision would set. Legal counsel weighed in on conduct policies, precedent, and risk management, while veteran players offered perspectives grounded in culture, cohesion, and locker room dynamics. The Leadership Council reportedly reached unanimous agreement on accountability, arguing that talent could never excuse behavior that undermined the team's values. The stakes went far beyond a single player. Carter wasn't just another athlete, he was a rising star, a cornerstone of the Eagles' defensive identity. Coaches had invested countless hours managing his intensity, channeling aggression into productivity, and refining elite techniques that made him a game-changer on the field. Losing him would immediately create a tactical void. Defensive coordinator Sean Desai and his staff were forced to consider how to restructure schemes, adjust rotations, and accelerate the development of backups, all under the looming shadow of media scrutiny and fan expectation. Amid the internal chaos, the organization also had to account for optics. Social media commentary, national scrutiny, and sponsor concerns demanded decisive action. Every move would be analyzed, every word dissected, and every delay interpreted as weakness or indecision. The pressure was relentless, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. Sources suggest that Roseman, while acknowledging the competitive risk, began working the phones, exploring defensive reinforcement options and trade possibilities to mitigate the on-field impact. Lurie, meanwhile, remained unwavering. The decision had to reflect the organization's core values first, competitive success second. This was leadership under fire. The Eagles' response would send a message not only to Carter, but to every player in the league. Conduct, character, and accountability matter above all else. The organization had to navigate a delicate balance too harsh, and they risked alienating players and creating locker room tension. Too lenient, and they would appear to condone behavior that undermined the franchise's principles. Every detail, from the timing of announcements to the handling of locker room dynamics, became a critical test of authority, judgment, and culture setting. By the time the meetings concluded, the narrative was clear. This wasn't just a disciplinary action. It was a defining moment in Eagles history. Every decision, every argument, every clash of opinion had been directed toward one goal: protecting the integrity of the organization. The process underscored a hard truth about professional sports: talent alone is never enough. Leadership, principle, and culture must be fiercely defended, even when it comes at the cost of on-field success. And as the sun rose the next morning, one fact was unavoidable. The Eagles were about to make a decision that would resonate far beyond the season, far beyond the stadium, and far beyond Jalen Carter himself. By Monday afternoon, the Eagles' decision was final, swift, and unequivocal. Jalen Carter was terminated. The official statement was brief, professional, and without nuance. The Philadelphia Eagles released their defensive linemen. No explanations, no negotiations, no attempts at public reconciliation, just immediate, decisive action. Within hours, Carter's presence at the NovaCare complex was erased. His locker cleared, personal belongings boxed and delivered separately, parking spot reassigned. Sources suggest he was not even permitted to enter the facility to collect items personally. The move sent a clear message: talent could never override principle. Inside the Eagles' locker room, the fallout was profound. The post-game atmosphere from the season opener, already tense after the ejection, now took on a somber, almost funeral-like tone. Players showered silently, coaches avoided eye contact, and any semblance of celebration or relief was replaced by reflection and concern. Veteran leaders like Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham reportedly addressed the team, emphasizing accountability and the importance of maintaining standards. The message was clear: the organization would not bend, no matter the immediate competitive cost. The termination also highlighted deeper organizational dynamics. Carter was a young, raw talent, brimming with potential but requiring careful management. He arrived from Georgia as a national champion with pre-draft concerns, including conditioning questions and a history of off-field incidents. The Eagles had invested heavily in his development, believing that a structured environment, veteran leadership, and a winning culture could channel his abilities positively. For weeks, the results had been promising training camp dominance, seamless preseason performance, and preparations for Week 1 appeared flawless. And then, 6 seconds into the season, everything collapsed. The ripple effects extended beyond the Eagles' locker room. Opposing teams, notably the Cowboys, privately celebrated the disruption. Prescott's dignified public response contrasted with his private processing of the incident, reflecting both personal indignation and newfound motivational advantage. Every future matchup between the teams would carry additional weight, a psychological layer fueled by the incident. Security measures, game preparation, and coaching strategies were all now influenced by a single impulsive act. Financially, the termination complicated roster and salary cap management. Carter's dead cap money accelerated, forcing the Eagles to evaluate potential replacements, practice squad elevations, and strategic roster adjustments. Howie Roseman, known for his mastery of financial maneuvering, suddenly faced unplanned challenges, balancing principle with practicality. Meanwhile, the market for Carter's services remained cautiously active. Some organizations viewed him as a salvageable talent, capable of redemption in the right environment, while others considered him a liability, radioactive due to character concerns. The broader lesson was unmistakable: actions have consequences, and in professional sports, no one is untouchable. 6 seconds had destroyed a promising career, disrupted a franchise, and transformed a historic rivalry. The Eagles had chosen principle over pragmatism, sending a message not just to Carter, but to every player, fan, and observer in the NFL. Character and conduct matter above all else. And as the organization moved forward, it became evident that the impact of that decision would reverberate far beyond 1 week, shaping culture, competition, and perception for months to come. The 6 seconds that ended Jalen Carter's Eagles career didn't just destabilize a team, it altered a rivalry: the Philadelphia Eagles versus Sackins. Dallas Cowboys has long been one of the NFL's fiercest, steeped in decades of playoff implications, intense competition, and raw emotion. But after Carter's ejection, the dynamic shifted entirely. This wasn't just a clash of teams anymore. It became a psychological battlefield, a narrative infused with humiliation, principle, and unresolved tension. For the Cowboys, the incident offered an unprecedented opportunity. Prescott and his teammates didn't have to create the chaos, they simply witnessed it. And the advantage, subtle yet undeniable, was theirs. Inside Dallas's locker room, the mood reportedly contrasted sharply with the Eagles' somber, silent showers. Prescott, though publicly composed, privately processed the disrespect. Teammates rallied around him, reinforcing unity and motivation. The incident became a rallying point, a story of resilience born from observing a rival's implosion. Coaches adjusted strategies, knowing that the Eagles' defense would be forced to compensate for the absence of a key player. The psychological edge was immediate, confidence surged, preparation sharpened, and the Cowboys approached future games with the knowledge that the Eagles had created a vulnerability with their own actions. For Philadelphia, the consequences were equally immediate, though far more complex. Carter's absence left a significant hole in the defensive line. Sean Desai, tasked with orchestrating elite-level defense, had to restructure schemes on the fly, accelerate development of backups, and communicate adjustments instantaneously during live gameplay. Roles shifted. Jordan Davis, Josh Sweat, and Nolan Smith were thrust into increased responsibilities, forced to perform at a higher level with no margin for error. Every snap, every play, every breakdown in coverage would now be scrutinized through the lens of Carter's absence. The defensive foundation, once a pillar of the Eagles' strategy, was suddenly cracked. The implications went beyond on-field performance. Rivalry games carry emotional weight, but now the Eagles-Cowboys clashes included an additional layer: personal animosity and public humiliation. Every Eagles defensive struggle would be measured against the benchmark of the 6-second incident, with fans, media, and analysts questioning decisions, rotations, and intensity. The December rematch already loomed as a high-stakes showdown, its anticipation fueled by tension, grudges, and unresolved emotions. Security concerns intensified, crowd energy escalated, and preparation for these games became as much psychological as tactical. Even beyond individual matchups, the ripple effects influenced broader competitive strategy. Opponents across the league now analyzed the Eagles' vulnerability, considering personnel adjustments and play calling changes. What had once been a cornerstone defense was now a potential liability. Championship aspirations, built on defensive dominance and cohesion, were suddenly subject to a single impulsive act. The Eagles' internal culture and identity were under scrutiny as they attempted to rebuild trust, enforce standards, and maintain performance, all while facing a rival strengthened by observation and advantage. In short, the spitting incident wasn't contained to one player or one game. It transformed a rivalry into a psychological war, disrupted defensive schemes, and forced both teams to navigate new dynamics. 6 seconds had changed everything: the rivalry, the competitive balance, and the stakes of every future encounter. And as the season progressed, every decision, every play, and every outcome would be filtered through the lens of that single defining moment. Jalen Carter's 6-second incident didn't just disrupt the Eagles and the Cowboys, it sent shockwaves throughout the entire NFL. Teams, executives, and league officials scrambled to assess the broader implications. Suddenly, every organization was forced to examine their own conduct policies, disciplinary protocols, and the balance between talent and accountability. What had once been an isolated controversy became a cautionary tale, a living case study in the stakes of professional behavior. Across the league, general managers and coaches discussed the incident privately. Some saw Carter as a cautionary example, a player whose immense talent could never excuse impulsive public misconduct. Others debated whether the Eagles' response was excessive, questioning if termination for spitting set a precedent that might become unsustainable. Veteran players weighed in anonymously, some praising the firm stance, others expressing concern that standards had been raised to extremes. The generational divide became clear. Younger players, accustomed to viral scrutiny, often viewed the punishment as harsh, while seasoned veterans recognized the organizational imperative of maintaining culture and reputation. The media amplified the ripple effects. Sports networks, podcasts, and social media commentary dissected every detail, using the incident to explore broader trends in athlete accountability, workplace standards, and organizational culture. Public relations experts highlighted the pressure on franchises to act decisively in an era where every misstep can become viral within minutes. Cable news programs framed it as a cultural moment, comparing professional sports to corporate environments where accountability and reputation are paramount. The story extended far beyond touchdowns and sacks, positioning the Eagles' decision as a template for consequences in the digital age. Even league officials felt the pressure. While the NFL has established conduct guidelines, Carter's termination raised questions about consistency. When does a single act warrant permanent removal? How should comparable situations be handled? How should the league intervene without undermining franchise authority? Sources suggest the league office monitored the fallout closely, prepared to step in if appeals or suspensions created public controversy. By acting decisively, the Eagles arguably preempted prolonged investigations, avoiding additional league involvement while establishing their own uncompromising standard. The impact extended to future personnel decisions as well. Prospective free agents, draft picks, and veteran signings were suddenly evaluating the Eagles as a franchise where character and conduct were non-negotiable. Other organizations noted the potential risks of acquiring players with perceived behavioral issues, while simultaneously recognizing opportunities to exploit vulnerabilities in teams facing internal disruption. Defensive coordinators across the league began adjusting evaluation metrics, factoring in both talent and temperament more heavily than ever before. Even beyond immediate strategy, Carter's termination sent a psychological message. In professional sports, actions even 6 seconds of impulsive behavior carry monumental consequences. Teams now had to weigh every disciplinary decision carefully, knowing that social media scrutiny, fan outrage, and sponsor reactions could amplify any misstep exponentially. The Eagles' decisive action set a precedent that would influence league-wide decision-making for years, reshaping expectations for player behavior, organizational accountability, and cultural enforcement. In short, Carter's incident became more than a team issue. It became a league-wide event. Every team, player, and executive watched, analyzed, and adjusted, recognizing that the NFL's landscape had changed. 6 seconds had rewritten the rules of engagement, accountability, and reputation management across professional football. The termination of Jalen Carter left two intertwined narratives in flux: his personal future and the trajectory of the Philadelphia Eagles. For Carter, the path forward is uncertain, filled with potential redemption but also littered with formidable obstacles. At just 23 years old, his talent is undeniable. He is fast, powerful, and disruptive along the defensive line, capable of changing the course of a game with a single play. Yet raw ability is no longer the only factor. Organizations now view him through a prism of trust, accountability, and personal growth. The mistakes of 6 seconds have become the defining lens through which teams will evaluate him. Multiple franchises reportedly engaged in private discussions, weighing the risks and rewards of acquiring Carter. Some executives see a chance for transformation, a player who, under veteran guidance and structured mentorship, could redirect his focus and regain competitive value. Others remain wary, labeling him radioactive, a cautionary tale of talent overshadowed by misjudgment. Any potential landing spot will demand a comprehensive approach, psychological support, strict behavioral expectations, and consistent demonstration of maturity on and off the field. Redemption is possible, but it will require patience, humility, and relentless effort. For the Eagles, the landscape is equally complex, losing a cornerstone of their defense force's structural and cultural recalibration. Defensive coordinator Sean Desai and his staff must accelerate the development of backups, adjust schemes, and reinforce communication patterns. Players like Jordan Davis, Josh Sweat, and Nolan Smith are now under intense pressure to perform, bridging the gap left by Carter's absence. The team must maintain cohesion while navigating grief, frustration, and the shock of witnessing a teammate's abrupt removal. Every defensive struggle, every big play allowed, will be analyzed through the lens of principle over pragmatism. The organizational culture itself faces a test. Leadership must demonstrate that standards are more than words, they are enforceable and meaningful. Siri and Roseman must balance competitive urgency with cultural integrity, ensuring that the message of accountability resonates without alienating the remaining players. The Eagles' handling of this crisis will define their identity for years, a team that prioritizes character, enforces principles, and navigates adversity with transparency and conviction. Meanwhile, the rivalry with Dallas has taken on new dimensions. Every meeting will now carry heightened emotional stakes, amplified media attention, and strategic recalibration. Cowboys players, motivated by observation of the Eagles' internal disruption, will approach future contests with psychological advantage, knowing they can exploit vulnerabilities created by principle-driven decisions. The December rematch promises to be a crucible, testing both the resilience of the Eagles' defense and the maturation of Carter's personal narrative should he resurface elsewhere. Ultimately, Carter's future and the Eagles' trajectory are entwined by the consequences of a single impulsive act. Talent, principle, culture, and strategy now intersect in ways that will shape both careers and the franchise's season. 6 seconds reshaped the NFL landscape, altering perceptions, opportunities, and expectations. The Eagles are challenged to recover, rebuild, and redefine themselves, while Carter faces the monumental task of proving that redemption is possible and that character can be restored alongside skill. In both cases, the stakes are immense, the scrutiny relentless, and the consequences permanent. The Jalen Carter incident leaves a lasting mark on the Philadelphia Eagles, the Cowboys, and the NFL as a whole. 6 seconds of impulsive behavior transformed a routine season opener into a moment that will be dissected for years. The Eagles won the game, but in many ways they lost far more than they realized. The defensive cornerstone that had been central to their plans was gone, their organizational harmony disrupted, and the psychological weight of principle over pragmatism now rests heavily on every player, coach, and executive. This wasn't just a disciplinary action, it was a statement about what the franchise values, and it has permanently altered the team's identity. For the Eagles, recovery is both a tactical and cultural challenge. Defensively, schemes must adapt, backups must rise to the occasion, and communication must be flawless to compensate for the absence of a dominant force. Leadership must reinforce standards while simultaneously fostering trust and cohesion in a locker room still processing the shock. The organization's response is being watched not only by fans and media, but by every player and executive in the league. The precedent set by Carter's termination will influence decisions on discipline, culture, and accountability for years to come. Every move the Eagles make will now be interpreted through the lens of principle and consequence, as the franchise attempts to maintain competitive viability without compromising integrity. Carter's personal journey is equally uncertain, though the potential for redemption exists. Talent alone is no longer sufficient. Character, accountability, and consistent behavioral growth will determine his path forward. Multiple organizations reportedly view him as a high-risk, high-reward acquisition, weighing his on-field potential against off-field liabilities. His rehabilitation process, both professional and personal, will be closely scrutinized. Success in football is not just about physical ability, it is about trust, discipline, and reliability. Carter must demonstrate all three to secure another opportunity, while the public and media will continue to observe every step of his journey with unrelenting attention. The ripple effects extend far beyond one team or one player. Across the NFL, teams are revisiting conduct policies, disciplinary thresholds, and the balance between talent and culture. Social media, mainstream coverage, and sponsor expectations ensure that incidents like this can never remain contained. The Eagles' decisive action has become a case study, demonstrating both the risks and the necessity of enforcing principles even when the competitive cost is high. Other organizations now face the question, when does accountability outweigh pragmatism, and how far should franchises go to protect culture and reputation? Ultimately, the Carter incident underscores a truth that resonates across sports and life. Actions have consequences, and talent cannot shield one from accountability. 6 seconds changed careers, altered a franchise, and redefined a rivalry. The Eagles chose principle over pragmatism, setting a standard that will echo throughout the NFL. The Cowboys gained a psychological edge, fans and media remain captivated, and the league itself has been forced to reconsider the boundaries of conduct. What began as a split-second act has evolved into a defining chapter in football history. As the season unfolds, questions remain. Will the Eagles recover and reclaim their defensive identity? Can Carter rehabilitate his reputation and return to elite competition? Will rivalries, strategies, and league-wide standards continue to evolve in response to this incident? Answers will emerge slowly, but one fact is undeniable. The consequences of those 6 seconds are immediate, permanent, and unforgettable. The Philadelphia Eagles, Jalen Carter, and the NFL at large will never view the game or each other the same way again. If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow and lets us know you love this kind of content. And hey, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with your friends, your group chats, or anyone who loves football as much as you do. The more the conversation spreads, the better it gets. Most importantly, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss when we drop fresh stories, wild rumors, or breaking updates that the mainstream media won't talk about.